Hi, Jane-ites, and welcome back to the What the Austen podcast. I have a wonderful guest lined up today. I am joined by best-selling author and book talker Ben Mercer. Today's topic is going to be friendship, specifically looking at Bingley and Darcy's friendship in Pride and Prejudice. So really excited for this conversation. Me and Ben have chatted a little bit prior, so I think it's going to be a really good one, and I hope you enjoy it. Welcome, Ben. It's such a pleasure to have you with me.
No, what a treat. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So the question I ask all of my guests is, what got you into Jane Austen originally?
I was trying to think about that earlier, actually, and I never actually got her as a set text, I don't think. Maybe not till university. So I kind of came to her a bit later when I was just sort of reading around some of the classics that I hadn't kind of gotten into. And I think maybe Northanger Abbey was the first one, or maybe that was university text. But then after that, then I had a kind of Pride and Prejudice that's obviously been adapted into so many great, TV and film adaptations. And then last year, actually, or maybe 2 years ago now, when we did the TikTok book club, Persuasion was the first set text, and I hadn't actually read Persuasion before, so that was really fun to get to do that. But I love Austen. I think it's one of the classics that really is sort of more readable. I think it's written in such a modern prose style that they're so approachable. So I'm always like, if people are asking which classics to read when they haven't really read any, I'm like, oh, you should definitely do Jane Austen because it's a bit more accessible, like in terms of its style than something like a Dickens or, like a Henry James or something like that, where it's a bit kind of thick and opaque. And I think Austen is also just really funny. So it's just, I love it. I think she's great.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, there is definitely something that's easier about Austen than other literary authors, I think. Just easygoing storylines, but also, like you said, like the actual writing itself isn't so dense and heavy like some of the crazy stuff. I remember I reading it like at uni, some of the stuff I was like, oh my gosh, like this is tough. But yeah, is your background in English literature then? Is that what you did at uni?
Yeah. So that was always my favourite subject at school, and then when I was thinking about going to university, that was really the only thing that I had any interest in doing. So yeah, I was English lit all the way, and I went to Newcastle and studied it there. I've always I went into rugby after that, but I've always considered doing master's courses, and I've done some writing and stuff. But I think eventually I'll get back to uni and do some more studying of some sort, but I don't really know quite what it is yet.
I know, I always have that pull myself. I'm always just like, I want to go back. I must learn more. I must write more on this. Yeah, definitely. That pull is always there.
I want to do it as a vanity project, though. It's like for no use whatsoever. Me and my friend's wife, we were on the same course at uni, and we talk about it a lot. We're like, when we're old, we'll go back to uni and like pure vanity masters. We'll go and do it. It'll be great.
Yeah, totally get that. It's also funny as well because one of the first things that I saw online with you was that reel that you made that you went to the Jane Austen Centre, and somebody thought you were an actor there, right? Because they saw you like in costume or something. They wanted a photo with you.
Yeah, so there's I'm from Bath, and there's Austen was very connected to Bath, as I'm sure you all know on the pod. And I was like, well, I've never actually been in here, so I went and visited. And on the way round, they've got these like costumes you can try on. And this girl who works in there who's dressed as Elizabeth Bennet, like was like, oh, put this jacket on me. And then there's some people visiting from China, and she said, oh, can we have photo video with you to say happy birthday to my son? And I was like, I don't work here. She was like, oh, I don't mind. So I was like, okay, well, I don't mind either. So we did a video. I was in a kind of is it a tricorn hat and a sort of admiral-ish jacket, and yeah, it was quite funny.
I love that. That's actually so hilarious. When I saw it, I was like, that's absolutely brilliant. So yeah, you might get cast, who knows? In like a future adaptation, they might pick you up, they might see that reel and be like, oh perfect.
Well, yeah, I'm open for business. And I said, I was like, do I get a job at the centre? And then they're yet to come back to me, but I can keep trying.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely brilliant. And I actually, massive disclaimer, I've never been to the centre. So I've been to Bath, but I went during COVID, so I couldn't go in. But I am going this year. I'm going to go when I go to the festival. So yeah, really excited.
Oh, what, you're going to go to the actual Austen festival? Yeah.
Yeah, so I was meant to go last year, but that kind of fell through for me. So I'm actually going with Kaylee, who a lot of people know on the podcast because she's a reoccurring guest. And we've actually met through the podcast. But yeah, she's coming over from the US and we're going to go together. So I'm super excited for that.
you're gonna have the best time. The place is hilarious because obviously it's just like it's a beautiful city, but it is just a normal place. And then suddenly there's hundreds of people.
Comes to life.
Yeah, and like full regalia, like wandering around. You're just like, what is going on? But yeah, it's great. You're just gonna you're gonna have the best time.
Yeah, I think so. I'm super excited for it. So yeah, that is later in the year for me. So we've kind of chatted a little bit about how we want today to go, but as all the episodes go, guys, it's probably just going to flow and we'll see where things take us. I thought it'd be really good to chat about maybe like your first experience reading Pride and Prejudice. Is the Darcy Bingley friendship something that stood out to you when reading it? Because I feel like it's something that's taken me a little while to recognise its significance.
Yeah, I think, and sort of by design, you're drawn to the sisters, aren't you? And principally Elizabeth and then probably Jane. But yeah, I think their friendship, the more you investigate it, the more complex and deep you realize it is, I think. And I mean, when you first come across them, one is just, it seems very obvious. It seems like, one's kind of like fun and nice, and the other's kind of staid and boring, and you're like, oh, actually. And then the more you get into it, the more you realize that actually they're quite codependent in a way, and they sort of bring the best out of each other in some respects, and that it's actually probably the best functioning friendship in the book, really, in a lot of ways. There's obviously the results of the friendship are not always optimal, but actually what they're trying to do and the way that they communicate between the two of them is actually quite good, I think, for the most part. The book is predicated on, a big misunderstanding in some respects. But I think in a way, those two, they always behave towards each other for the right reasons, I think. In general.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, there's definitely a respect there, which I think is super important. And I think something that really, I think for me, stands out a lot of like men in my life who have male friendships. Respect actually does kind of form the foundation a lot of the time. If the respect's not there, it just crumbles anyway. So it's kind of something that's needed. I think I'm not saying that's not needed in female friendships as well, but I think there's a more significance placed on it by men. I don't know if you find that yourself.
Yeah, I think you want to know you can rely. You need that, like, you want to be able to rely on your friend for something. And I think, Bingley can obviously rely on Darcy for his counsel and for his sort of his deep thinking and his sincerity. But actually, Darcy also sort of needs Bingley to like make him fun and drag him places. And we all need that fun friend sometimes who's going to like get you out of your own way. And while Darcy sort of claims to resent it, and he's like, I don't want to be at this dance, and this is boring and silly. And it's like, but he's still there. He's still
Yes.
He's still allowed his sort of slightly sort of foppish friend to like drag him out. And I think it's like, well, if he didn't respect him and his judgment and what he wanted to do, he wouldn't go. So
Such a good point. Yeah, I think there's actually a good point a bit later when Jane's at Netherfield and she's sick, and there's this massive debate between Darcy, Bingley, Caroline, and Elizabeth, and Bingley actually says, on a normal Sunday night, Darcy's just chilling at home, like he's doing nothing, and Darcy's like slightly offended by it because I think he's a bit embarrassed that he's telling Elizabeth that, but it's just funny that they know that about each other. And I'd love to chat a little bit about the initial description of their friendship as well, because I think this is like such an incredible outline of a friendship in a book, because considering, like you said, like we focus on the sisters and we focus on the romantic side of the book, there's something to be said that when an author sets out like a whole paragraph just to describe a friendship, I feel like that in itself suggests that it's important. So the quote goes, "Between him and Darcy, there was a very steady friendship. In spite of great opposition of character, Bingley was endeared to Darcy by the easiness, openness, and ductility of his temper, though no disposition could offer a greater contrast to his own, and though with his own he never seemed dissatisfied. On the strength of Darcy's regard, Bingley had the firmest reliance, and on his judgment the highest opinion. In understanding, Darcy was the superior. Bingley was by no means deficient, but Darcy was clever. He was at the same time haughty, reserved, fastidious, and by manners, though well-bred, were not inviting. In that respect, his friend had greatly the advantage. Bingley was sure of being liked wherever he appeared. Darcy was continually giving offence." And I just love that in in like one paragraph, you can really outline the difference of their characters, but also why their friendship really works. That they need that kind of opposition of character to then actually balance each other out.
They're almost like a couple, you know, in terms of, you know, they make a complete whole when you listen to that paragraph. And yeah, I think that that it really is, yeah, a complete kind of entity between the two of them, and actually an amazing self-awareness. You know, they both recognize that their own personal kind of failings, or, you know, like weaker points, and actually they can find, they can redress those like through their friend. And actually that's an amazing kind of self-awareness, and not only that, you know, not only kind of the regard for someone else, but actually to know who you are and like what you're good and bad at. And I think actually that's quite mature.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe it's not so present in some of the other kind of dynamics in the book.
Oh, yeah, I think that's so true. And also, what I love is neither character seems to judge the other for their differences. I think that again that comes up later in the book, but I think sometimes Elizabeth can judge Jane slightly, the fact that she is a little bit more empathetic. But I feel like Darcy doesn't judge Bingley for his difference in character.
No, I think that's true. And actually, you can see that because they can poke fun at each other, particularly Bingley, you know, poking the bear in the, you know, in these social situations. But actually, that he can do that means that, yeah, there is a level of respect and kind of love and appreciation between the two of them, because yeah, I think if you can't mock something, then it's too delicate a topic. And I think actually the ability for them to do that and the confidence they have in their friendship means that they can kind of poke fun like that, or even discuss those personal differences in company. And actually some of the other characters would not brook that discussion.
It's so true. It cracks me up when he's like, I must have you dance. I hate to see you standing about yourself in this stupid manner. You had a much better dance. And then Darcy's just there like, I don't find anybody attractive here. There's loads of people. What are you on about?
Yeah, Bingley's like, it's babes everywhere. Come on, pal. And he's just like,
Grave slave.
but you know, I actually feel his pain. It's like I really dislike, you know, like unless I'm, you know, few sheets to the wind, then it's like I'm not a big like dancer, so I'm just like, oh no. But yeah, you sometimes you do need someone to get you out of your own way, and actually that's pretty funny.
Yeah, I think so as well. It just kind of cracked me up slightly.
I think
Um,
just to jump back in quickly, I think the other thing is, you know, saying that Bingley, you know, he's not deficient in intelligence, and you know, back to the quote you read out, but actually, you know, intelligence manifests in different forms, and the ability to be liked and to walk into a social situation and to get on with everyone. That is an amazing form of intelligence. And you know, from my friends at school, there was our friend who was kind of the least academically inclined. You know, like, you know, not to be too mean, but actually amazing in social situations, you know. And he could, you know, we do bits of laboring in the summers, and he'd be there, you know, hacking cigarettes with all these other guys. And you know, but and now his work, he, you know, he works in kind of high-end recruitment, and he's dealing with executives and stuff like that, and he's a real social chameleon. He's got that understanding of people. And I think someone like Bingley, you're like, yeah, mate, and he says, you know, oh, you know, I don't have an eye for detail. You know, these are my sort of weaknesses. But actually, he can walk in a room and talk to people and make a situation kind of fun and interesting. And that is an intelligence. You know, that you know, it doesn't intelligence is not necessarily, you know, academic or studied. It's also in the moment.
yes. And also, if you're someone who is more academically inclined, you could spend your life learning how to be more socially intelligent, you know, because it's a necessary skill in life. And I think Darcy has the benefit that he's already established, but
Mm.
Bingley has to um, be inviting and get on with the people in this community because he wants to move to that area. So it wouldn't benefit Bingley at all to be snobbish and rude and not want to get involved with the community, which in fact, with his position, he'd probably be leading.
Mm, yeah, he needs to start the party, right? And you know, and also, like you say, he's trying to establish himself, and he's trying to meet someone. You know, he's like, well, I want, you know, this is what I want. You know, like so,
So
and he's actually, you know, this is actually also what Darcy wants, even if he won't admit it to himself, right? And Bingley understands that about his friend. So yeah, I think actually it's a kind of, they do have an amazing degree of understanding, you know, of the other.
yeah, something that I love as well is the way that they approach social classes is quite different. Um, And we see that at Meryton Ball, like that first assembly, the fact that Darcy's like, you know, being snobbish and doesn't want to get involved with everyone, and Bingley's living his best life. But you see that a few more times, especially when Caroline's kind of kissing up to Darcy a lot and being like, oh, like, you know, they have aunts and uncles in Cheapside, and like trying to make out how they're like really beneath everybody. But Bingley's like, they could have aunts and uncles to fill the whole of Cheapside. I wouldn't care one bit. And I think then Darcy's response being, well, it would just mean that they'll struggle to marry well because of that. I think it's so important for Darcy to have a friend who humbles him every so often, who's literally just like, yes, but that's not the point. Like, you know, I mean, we're all human at the end of the day, and let's not think because we have money that we are somehow superior to everybody else around us.
I think Darcy, yeah, that is his great sort of issue, isn't it? That he is in his own way. I think like what he does later proves that he has a kind of a sort of humility, and you know, like he goes to these places to seek out Wickham and, you know, redress this situation. But yeah, I mean, everything with Darcy does sort of relate back to his cash hammer, doesn't it? You know, so I think he's probably a little more humble than he initially lets us see. But yeah, that is definitely his it's not very endearing, is it? Where he's just like, oh, well, there's no point because look at these people. You're just like, well, you know, you're a bit of a dick.
Yeah, I think as well, I think Bingley recognises that, because Darcy, by all means, doesn't necessarily need to be friends with somebody like Bingley. Although they're both kind of in landed gentry, like I said, Darcy's really established. So actually even choosing to be friends with Bingley shows that he isn't actually quite the pompous, proud person he makes out to be. And he spends so much time with the Bingleys, right? And I love that Bingley, compared to his sister, does not kiss up to Darcy. And I think that's why Darcy respects and loves Bingley the way that he does, and has absolutely no respect or love towards Caroline, because she's constantly trying to like kiss up to him. Whereas Bingley's like, just makes fun of Darcy, like we said before.
She almost mirrors Darcy's worst behaviours back at him, doesn't she? With in terms of like the snobbery and those sorts of things. And you're right, his kind of rejection of her in a way is a rejection of the worst parts of himself. And you know, and you're right, like, you know, the fact that he hangs out with Bingley and enjoys it and persists is a sort of it's a sort of continued effort to engage with the wider world, you know, rather than, you know, like the sort of marriage that's been sort of set up for him on the other side. And his sort of lack of desire to actually follow through with that is an indication of being like, no, there is a kind of bigger world and more interesting world out here. And obviously Elizabeth ends up being his kind of, you know, the sort of final puncture to his pomposity.
Yes, I love that. But I think that's so important in friendships as well. It'd be good to hear your thoughts on this. But for me, the friendships that I seem to have valued the most over the years are the ones where I've actually recognized something in myself that I want to change, because I've seen a great quality in one of my friends. Like one of my bestest friends, she has fantastic girl code, like is loyal, and is like, I know she'd have my back, like anything that went on, like she would be there, even above herself sometimes, which, you know, we can discuss whether or not that's good or bad. But yeah, I just think in from being friends with her and witnessing that, it's made me a better woman and the friend that I am to people as well, because I'm like, I want to show up the way that she does for my friends. So I don't know about you as well. Is it like, you know, it's that learning from the people around you, choosing to be friends with people that you see qualities that you might not have, but that you want to have?
Oh, definitely. I think I'm very lucky. I've got a group of friends. We were at school together from when we were about 7. So that, and I've got, you know, friends from university and other places, but there are kind of a group of us who are all still friends now. And yeah, you definitely sort of see in the others, you're like, oh, well, he actually kind of, you know, there's one guy who really gets out of his own way and sort of tries things, you know, just sort of, he doesn't over research, whereas I have a sort of tendency to be a bit over analytical before doing anything, whereas he's someone who just jumps 2 feet in. And we've got this other friend who's really good in social situations. We've got another friend who's kind of just very like chill, like nothing's too exciting or too, you know, too awful. He's always just like, yeah. And, you know, you see these qualities and you just sort of every now and again use them to like redress, your own direction. Every so often you're like, oh, you know, if he did that, what would he do? And you're like, okay, well, why wouldn't I why don't I try that for once rather than carry on in my same sort of patterns, I suppose. Yeah.
No, I love that. And also, that's a great point that you've brought up there, because obviously you're saying you have a friendship group. And I feel like in literature, a lot of the
Mm.
time, maybe more in like postmodern texts, like I remember reading a lot of like Julian Barnes and stuff. And in his texts, it's often bigger friendship groups. It's not these like one-on-one friendships. So I feel like personally that the Bingley Darcy dynamic is quite unique in the sense that it's not a group of men who are friends who, like you said, have grown up together, which in my experience with like my male friends, like they tend to have a group that they've grown up with. So yeah, I think it's interesting that there's just the two of them.
I think
Whether that's
they're rare in the book, right? Because, and I think the fact that they can be so sincere with each other is something else. And I think I feel like I can be sincere with my male friends, and that doesn't happen all the time. And it does tend to happen more in a one-to-one environment. And actually, Elizabeth and Charlotte, Elizabeth turns down Mr. Collins, and then Charlotte kind of goes behind her back and accepts his proposal. And Elizabeth's like, why didn't you say anything? And so in some ways, the Bingley Darcy thing is much more kind of profound and sincere than Elizabeth's, because it's like, well, if that's your best friend and she couldn't even talk to you about this thing because you wouldn't understand it, she couldn't even talk through it with you. Actually, that's quite serious. Whereas, like the Bingley Darcy thing is like, no, he's like, I think you're making a big mistake. And even though he's wrong, he's only acting on what he's seen, and the for the reasons he explains, to Elizabeth. So, yeah, I think the sincerity thing is the thing that's tough in groups of men. I would, in my experience, and particularly in a kind of, in the sort of rugby team environment, those things are tough. And actually being sincere and really putting yourself out there is really, really hard. Whereas in the one-to-one environment, it's much easier to do. And I think actually every time you do it, you come away from that interaction with a strengthened friendship. Usually, I don't know, what you're disclosing, but like in my experience,
deepest, darkest secrets.
yeah, as long as there's no bodies to bury or anything, like you're probably going to come away with a better friend,
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I was typing notes at the same time because you made me think about loads of different things there. One of them being, yes, I think the Charlotte Lizzie friendship is a great one to compare it to, because even when Charlotte actually explains her choice, like she says, like, I'm not romantic. I want a comfortable home. Like, this is a great opportunity for me. Lizzie still doesn't get it. She's like, I feel betrayed that you don't see the world the way that I do. And that reminds me very much of a conversation I had with my dad about male friendships compared to female friendships. And I think my dad said something like, he says he often observes with women that they can be that a bit more like catty and judgmental and have a tendency to maybe gossip about people and everything. And he said, whereas he said with his friends, he's much older, like, in his 50s now. So he's not got that many male friends, but he still has a few. But he said I wouldn't be inclined to talk about my male friends out publicly. You know what I mean? I wouldn't disclose anything about them. And I think that's very interesting. And I do think that goes to that kind of intimacy and how close you are with somebody, because I know with my closest friends, I would never talk about them behind their back or like disclose anything that you wouldn't want me to. But I feel like men have a loyalty that's often much stronger than you see in women's friendships. And I do think that's interesting. And I don't know whether that is because it's more difficult for them to be open. So when they are, I'm making judgments here. When they are, then they actually feel like, wow, this is an important connection for me. I need to protect this.
Yeah, maybe it's like you say, with the kind of the rarity of a more vulnerable interaction means it's taken with greater gravity. I don't know. I think the Charlotte and Elizabeth thing is also, obviously women are on the back foot in the kind of social hierarchy, and so Charlotte's kind of protecting, like you say, her interests more than she's kind of advancing her kind of emotional existence, I suppose. But yeah, I think there's obviously that kind of power dynamic to take into account, why she wouldn't kind of disclose what she's thinking of doing, in case maybe Elizabeth reconsiders or something. I'm not sure, but yeah, I don't know. It's a funny one. I think, yeah, men maybe they do take those disclosures with more weight, but maybe that's just because they don't happen very often, or maybe they get fewer opportunities to tell people about their mates.
No, I think this is true. I found an article which I will tag everything below, guys, in the bio as usual. But it was basically on women receiving more emotional support from their friends than men do. And I think I sent this to you, Ben. But there's like a whole scale, and it shows, received emotional support from a friend. 41% of women, over 21% of men. Told a friend you love them, like 49% of women, over 25% of men. Shared personal feelings or problems with a friend, 48% of women, over 30% of men. So that would suggest to me that either men struggle to share these more intimate feelings with their male friends, or that maybe like men in society are actually struggling to find these close male friends in general, which yeah, I mean, I think that in itself is a good topic to talk on.
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of both. I mean, like when I've had difficult periods, and maybe in my kind of early 20s, I think I lacked I lacked the language or the kind of the concept. I couldn't express myself in a way that would allow me to receive that emotional support. I didn't know how to do it. Whereas I feel later, once I stopped playing rugby, and it was a big transitional time, because I was like, I need to find a new career, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I had a personal relationship end. So, but then I was much more able to sort of say, like, I'm finding this difficult, or I'd love some advice, or and actually I found my friends were more than capable of giving me amazing advice. But actually, I needed the tools to go and get it, and they would not venture. They wouldn't try and crack my dam. They might try and help me in a kind of oblique way, like invite me to do stuff. But they, I would have to open up the possibility of a discussion myself. And when I was younger, I don't think I knew how to do that. And it's something as I've gotten older that I feel I've gotten a lot better at it. It's not like I'm suddenly, suddenly a sort of Zen master who's perfect at this sort of thing. But I think I have gotten better. But maybe women are more forthcoming with help and support if they see the need. Whereas maybe men, you almost need to like open up yourself to that support and like make it clear that you would like it. Because I don't think anyone wants to say, "Hey, mate, looks like you're having a,
Having a tough
you're
time.
having a tough. You look terrible.
You're rough right now. What is going on?
Let's sit down. So I think maybe there's that. I think women are probably better at both venturing and probably asking for support from their friends.
Love that. And I read another article by Jill Suttie, which actually talks about that in the sense that as you're growing up as a man, often you go through these stages. Like when you're in primary school, sometimes it's easy to make friends because you're all just like, it's like rough and tumble, you're just having a great time together. Then when you hit teenage years, it can be a little bit more difficult, because sometimes there's this pressure that having a close relationship with other men, you can be like scrutinized. They can be like, oh, you're really feminine, you're being really soft. And that can often put men off from being open. And then it's relearning that, like you said, when you hit your 20s into your 30s, it's relearning actually how do you have these really important close relationships with other men. Because like you said, I mean, you're not always going to be in a relationship with somebody so that you've got that partner, but also, do you want to put all your eggs in that basket as well? You sometimes you need these people outside of a relationship that you can confide in and you can talk to and feel safe doing that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. The opportunities for friendship decrease as you get older, and I think partly it's the decline of like the group activity. I think for men, one of the things you sent me was talking about the importance of like group activities, and I obviously had that a lot with sport when I was growing up, and then into my work life. And I think there's a kind of decline of these things anyway. Like the kind of the economic environment is very difficult, and people are now, a lot of these things relied on people volunteering, and people now either don't have the time or kind of expect to be paid for their work. I think you see that with a lot of like sports clubs. I think the other thing is, yeah, I mean, I've made a really good friend in the last couple of years. We met on an online course during lockdown, and he just sent a load of DMs basically to other people on the course, and we had a Zoom call. And then, once the like lockdown was over, and we met up, but there was a point where I'm like, what does this guy want? I'm like, I think, like, I'd like to be friends with him, but it's like, what does he want? And then it was like, and then it turns out, yeah, and now we're great friends. And actually, he kind of works in a very freelance manner similar to me, and so I've kind of got a couple of friends who are sort of freelancey, and we're not all in touch with each other, but every so often people check in on the others. It's send the odd text, how's things going, and it tends to be when someone's up, someone else is down, and so we've got this like sort of slightly informal network of like freelance support, I suppose, which is quite funny. But yeah, I think when you're a bit older, you are a bit like, to let someone in feels like a much bigger leap, I suppose. And yeah, you are a bit like, what do they want? And sometimes it's like, no, they just want to like make a friend.
Just want to be friends.
Yeah.
Yes, no, I think that's so true. And I don't think that's specific just to men either. Like I found that as when you leave uni and then you go into your career, and for me, I was working for myself for a few years, which was kind of isolating. And like you, I have a friendship group that I grew up with. So luckily I had those people in my life. But creating the podcast and meeting people through that, it's meant that I've made friends who have similar interests, which I think when you become an adult, you do have to be a little bit more active in seeking out those friends, which at times can seem a little bit creepy. It's like, what does this person want from me? I'm not sure. But yeah, and I love that. But right, that's the same for Darcy and Bingley, right? They are in a similar stage of life. And so you kind of have to find those people, and like attracts like, you get drawn together, and sometimes it's easier to then face life together because you're experiencing the same stuff.
It's kind of like they're going clubbing together, though, in a way, isn't it? It's like, come on, let's go. Let's like go meet some girls. It's like, let's go to the ball. Let's meet some girls, which is quite funny. I think there was a really good bit in one of the quotes you sent me, which was in terms of like, they're sort of having a crack at each other, and Bingley's talking about his writing being bad. And saying, I just dash it off, and I'm so bad, And Darcy's like, nothing is worse than false humility. And he's like, because actually you're trying to make a virtue of like your speed and flightiness, and the fact you could like get up and leave at 5 minutes notice. But Darcy really values, like he obviously loves Bingley, but the things that he prides in himself are kind of constancy and reliability and dependability. And yeah, he values kind of clarity and commitment, doesn't he? He doesn't like uncertainty, which is probably partly why he doesn't like social situations, because and partly why he initially doesn't like Elizabeth, because he's like, who is this? She's like, give me like no respect and all the rest of it. But in the sort of the judgment he makes on the Bennets, or like the way that he's kind of wrong about a lot of the Bennets, is that he thinks they're sort of silly little girls. But to some extent, he's kind of right with the younger ones who are just young girls, and also the mother, who's like a sort of figure of fun throughout the book. So in some respects, his judgment is sort of half right, but the way in which it's half wrong is catastrophic. So,
yes. Oh my gosh, I have two thoughts on this. I agree. And I've made the argument before, may have been controversial, that I said, yes, Darcy is rude, can come across as rude, but I would actually argue that he's selective. But I feel personally he has the absolute right to be. He's established in life. He's, this like multi-millionaire. He's living his best life, okay? And I feel like at that stage, you do have to be selective. You can't just be entertaining anyone and everyone. You don't know what their motives are. And so yes, does he go about things the wrong way? But does he have the right to do so? I would argue yes in some scenarios. But also, didn't you find with that section something that stood out with me? How much foreshadowing? I never realised this till I picked out that actual section. And I was like, oh my gosh, isn't that so funny? He's telling Bingley what he thinks will be problematic for Bingley. Then he himself uses that against Bingley. I was like, oh my gosh, that just really stood out to me. I was like, wow, that's interesting. He does say to Bingley, like, your flightiness, or like the fact that you are just kind of a bit all over the place and it'll go with somebody else's judgment can be your downfall. And we actually see that being the case because it plays out that way.
No, that's true. And I think it sort of foreshadows Darcy's own problem as well, right? Because it's like he's obviously wrong. And it's like Bingley's propensity to just follow through with it is his lack of self-direction, is, like you say, like why it causes all this heartache later. Whereas if he had the courage of his own convictions, then actually he would just have proposed to Jane before and saved everyone a whole lot of bother.
Yes, so, so true. Something that stands out to me though is that I really feel like Darcy's behavior and the way that he goes about influencing Bingley comes from a place of love, I believe, because there's a moment when Sir William Lucas is going around talking about the fact that Jane and Bingley are going to be married soon, and like everybody in the town does, and it's like super embarrassing. And when he says this and Darcy hears it, Sir William's allusion to his friends seemed to strike him forcibly, and his eyes were directed with very serious expression towards Bingley and Jane, who were dancing. Like, he actually feels concern. And we see later on that he says, like, I didn't know that she was interested in you. Like, she seemed like she was happy and having a good time, but I didn't see anything that showed like a marked interest in him specifically. And so I feel like there is that sense of like wanting to protect your friend, which actually seems like such a fantastic quality, right? You don't want your friend to get hurt. Obviously he has his own motives as well, but I feel like the underlying reasons are actually quite positive.
I think Darcy, for all his flaws, he does tend to act in the best interests of the people he loves, and I think you're right. I think he is acting in Bingley's best interest, and what he sees is a manipulation of Bingley. He's seeing a kind of community pull together. He thinks the room has been seeded by, a sort of silly mother. She sees a good opportunity to marry up. So he sees a manipulation in that interaction, doesn't he? When he hears that, he thinks, oh, there's a kind of broader manipulation. This girl doesn't actually like him. And, she obviously does like him and is kind of acting on, she's quite similar to Bingley in that she's acting on the advice of others to not be too keen and, that sort of thing. And I think in a way, like the whole thing is about sincerity and actually being sincere, and is hard. I I love this comedian Stuart Lee, and at the end of one of his sets, he gets a guitar out, and the whole place goes quiet, and he's like, "Ooh," he's like, "We've discovered the last taboo." And he's like, "It's not some sort of big topic." He was like, "It's a man trying to do something sincerely and well." And I think like, and maybe more in male friendship as well, like being sincere with each other is actually really difficult. So I think Darcy is like, he is sincerity above all else, right? And to a fault, but yeah, he's when he senses insincerity, then his hackles are up.
Yes, absolutely. I think so as well. And you can actually tell with the things that he discloses to Bingley that he really trusts Bingley.
Mm.
And that there is like we've been saying, a really intimate friendship there, because he tells Bingley about the whole Wickham situation. I know I have some quotes somewhere. I don't know if you can find them in this sheet about that.
He says something like, doesn't Bingley say like, "Oh, I know the kind of broad brush details," and he's like, "And I don't need to know more because I just trust Darcy."
Yes, isn't that massive though? Like, and also, like, I always argue, Mr. Bingley's such a great guy. Why would he have such an awful friend? He wouldn't, right? If he trusts and loves and supports Darcy, Darcy must have some fantastic qualities, because I just don't think he'd be inclined to have an awful friend.
Definitely. No, I think you're right. There was, what's the other thing I saw that was the thing that's really funny in that like earlier interaction as well was Bingley's like, well, it's just because he's tall. It's like, Darcy's tall, and that's why everyone listens to him. And then he's like, if he was just like a normal height or a short guy, we'd be less inclined to give his opinions weight. I mean, it's like he's obviously sort of mocking him, but there is something in that, isn't there? Like, there must be some statistics that it's like tall people are just taken more seriously than short people, and definitely in dating, because people are like, they go on
Yes.
a dating app and they're like, 6 foot's the cutoff, and they're just like, absolutely not under 6 foot. So it's actually true,
Oh my God. Yeah, that's so funny. But I don't think my best friend's probably not going to listen to this because she's not a massive Jane Austen fan, but oh my gosh, she actually dates like that. Like, if they're tall, she'll make a beeline for these people. I think it's true. I think it is absolutely true. And she's really short. She's like my height. So I'm just like, friend, I don't understand this, but okay. But it must be that. It must be this presence that, like, you should be respected, and like, you've got something important to say because you're so tall. I don't know.
And Bingley's obviously like, what a load of rubbish. Like, it's just because he's tall. This is the only reason we listen to him. And like, actually, yeah, I think that does just touch on something. And I think, you know, like to kind of be like serious about it. I think it's part of the reason that like Austen endures as well, because you're like, yeah, that's funny, and it's still true. You know, it's like it's a sort of human nature like silliness that she points out, and then we're still doing it. So it's like I think it's part of the reason that we still like Jane Austen. You know, it's like these sorts
Right.
of observations.
It's like a commentary on human psyche, honestly. It's genius. It's absolutely genius. And like you said, it's what makes her timeless, because we're all just like, I know somebody like that, or I know people who would make that same comment, or, you know what I mean? We still believe the same stuff. Yeah, and it's just blows my mind a little bit. It would be good to chat a little bit about Darcy's letter to Elizabeth and how he's actually coming to realize that he was mistaken about Jane's feelings. Again, I mean, I don't think he's like, oh, I feel really bad about it, but he does say, you know, like, it's interesting that he chose to conceal the fact that Jane was in London because he knew that Bingley wasn't like, I don't know what he says. He says something along the lines like he wasn't free from danger or something. Like, if he knew, he would have gone to see her and he still would have like married her. So I think that's really interesting. I think that shows the other side to Bingley, that maybe he isn't such a pushover to his friend, but he just respects his friend's judgment, but it wouldn't be the deciding factor for him. And I feel like that there is that tension for Bingley throughout the novel. Is he just a bit of a wet lettuce, or does he just respect his friend? It's like,
it's a bit of a laziness in a way, isn't it? It's like outsourcing your and particularly, you know, the biggest personal decisions that you have, and just outsourcing them. Oh yeah, he knows what he's doing. So, and that is a kind of lack of bravery in a way. But then Bingley is the one who is a sort of positive, you know, puts the energy into the world, and you know, and believes in people. He's much more of a kind of yeah, in a way he's very positive. So it's like it's strange that that lack of like commitment, and that's really what Darcy's talking about, isn't it? It's like that lack of kind of personal agency like actually is holding him back. But and it's a sort that is a kind of personal fallibility that again Darcy is like you know, like it comes completely out of the blue and it's done terribly and like with all the wrong wordings. But you know, when he first proposes to Elizabeth and she's like, what, like, you know, and because he's not evinced like a single bit of interest, but at least he does it, you know. It's like, this is, you know, against all my better judgment and your lack of social station, it's like, this is what I want, like, I can't help myself. Whereas like with Bingley, like Darcy knows he will probably behave like that if he's there, but Bingley like won't actually do that, which is kind of interesting.
and also what's so bad is he's so hypocritical, right? I mean, he's like, first reason you can't marry Jane is because, you know, all this impropriety, and it's just like, you know, they're all talking about you, I think she's after your money kind of thing. And then he's also like, and also I'm pretty sure she's not really interested in you. But Elizabeth is actively not interested in Darcy, and he picks up on no signals whatsoever and continues to propose to her. It's fascinating that he chooses differently for his friend than he does for himself. He's more observant when it comes to his friend than he is when in his own situation.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is a sort of enormous hypocrisy where it's like, I know what's best for you, but actually, I also know what's best for myself, and it's not the. You know, I'm just going to ignore everything I've just said, which is pretty funny. I wonder if it's, I mean, because the Pride and Prejudice goes both ways, doesn't it? You know, they're both guilty of it, you know, Darcy and Elizabeth, and I wonder if, yeah, I wonder at what point her affection kind of begins, whether she kind of predisposes herself to dislike him because of, you know, who he is and his manner, and because everybody else thinks he's like a great, you know, sort of a big fish. And I wonder at what point her regard turns actually, and whether Darcy has noticed that in her in a way that she's not noticed it in herself. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure it has actually begun at that point.
No, I think that's so true. Yeah, I think that's so true. And obviously the letter does make a massive difference to Elizabeth, because that's when she starts to be like, oh my gosh, I've been so mistaken. Like, I thought all of this. And I think part of like the journey for Darcy and Lizzie is they come to recognize that they have similar flaws, in that they've actually actively both participated in miscommunication across the board and believing the wrong people in all of that. And poor Jane and Bingley are just there, like, just stumbling through life, like, oh my goodness, what's going on with these two? And luckily, I mean, they managed to come back together. And I think obviously, I think Elizabeth places a lot of onus that it's Darcy's influence that Bingley comes back to Jane and wants to propose to her again. I don't know. I think he would do it regardless, personally. I think he just needed the green flag. But I just think that's interesting as well, that actually, even till the end of the book, Elizabeth still states that Darcy's influence is significantly important to Bingley.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right. Like, he's kind of the driver of the plot in a lot of ways. Darcy, he does he does sort of pull the levers that make things happen. Yeah, it's an interesting one, and it's interesting as well that they're both. I mean, they are the only male friendship, I suppose, because even Mr. Bennet, he's actually I we love Mr. Bennet, I think, but like he's actually a kind
I
of
do, anyways.
he's actually like a sort of he's a bit of a lone wolf, really, in the same way that Mr. Collins and Mr. Wickham, all these other guys, and Mr. Wickham's in the military, so he's obviously in kind of a regiment, but they're only ever kind of presented on their own, and Darcy and Bingley the only actual sort of functioning male friendship in some ways.
Oh, I think that's such a great point as well, because there's a really weird section when Lydia and Wickham run off together, when they're asking Denny, who's meant to be like Mr. Wickham's closest friend, and Denny's like, I don't know, I think he was just going to go and have some fun. But he genuinely doesn't know that much about him, and it shows that difference between these close friendships and then obviously more acquaintances, but just because you're kind of forced into these bigger groups, whether that is like sports, whether that's the military or what have you, they're kind of enforced friendships in a sense, as opposed to chosen friendships, which I think influences how close you become with people potentially.
Yeah, well, sometimes friendships begin a lot of the time. They're environmental, aren't they? Like they're your school, or like you say, they're a hobby or their vocation, and then actually for them to kind of take hold, they then need to become about something else, because those things stop, don't they? Like school stops, and sports stops, or like these different things, they probably stop for one reason or another. So you need, while it's the kind of window, those things are the kind of window into a friendship, you actually need then something else to sustain it. And I think the other characters, like you say, like Mr. Wickham is like, oh, this is his mate in the unit. It's like, yeah, well, we just work together. So look at the guy's like, I don't really know. I don't know about that guy. Where it's like,
Mate's a strong word.
yeah. Whereas like Darcy and Bingley are actually like, they're actual friends.
Actual bromance, actual full-on bromance.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with that as well. And something else that I'd love to touch on is there's a whole piece of writing by Ian McKean, I want to say, where he talks about the fact that Jane Austen rarely or never has conversations that are just between two men, because she wouldn't have actually experienced that herself. Like, she wouldn't have ever just been like, in a room, like chatting with, there's like two men chatting and she's just like observing the situation. So I think that's really interesting, that obviously there's a bit of a gap between like what we actually know that Bingley and Darcy will have discussed, and it's interesting that sometimes the only way that we see them is kind of in these bigger social settings together and everything. So I just think that's important as well. And the fact that Jane Austen is a female author, like she is a woman, so she doesn't have personal experience with this. And I think we were chatting before that maybe that becomes slightly problematic, like women writing about men. But I think he mentioned that actually that can be a benefit sometimes, writing about male friendships and kind of putting a spotlight on it.
I think, I like to think anyone can write about anything, and then if you do it badly, then people are going to say. But if you do it in an informed and honest way, then I think that's fine. But you're right. I think maybe it's a kind of maybe it's sort of wisdom on her part in that, I don't actually know about this. And I think now you've said that, there are certain points in Austen, aren't there, where there'll be quite an intimate moment, and then it'll just zoom out, and they'll be like, and then they carried on discussing, and and it's almost like they are, the rest of it happened, and then now we're over here, and I wonder how much of that is around her kind of personal experience in certain situations. And when you sent me that quote, it really made me think of this quote about Ernest Hemingway, and it's the same as the other way around, where it's like someone said, Mary Carr said about him. I pulled it up. It says he doesn't spend a lot of time giving women any kind of inner life at all, really. In some ways, I think that's preferable to the inner life he might have given them if he dared write it. And he was self-aware enough as a writer to know that he didn't understand what was going on in those pretty little heads. And you're like, wow, I wonder, if that's it. And it's like, if Jane Austen similarly is like, I don't actually know, so I'm just not going to touch it. And I'm great over here. I don't know. It was interesting to see that about two kind of big literary heavyweights, but on the opposite front.
Yes, I think Jane Austen herself makes kind of comment back to that, not directly, but in Persuasion, when she says, men have had the advantage of us in telling their own story. Education has been theirs in so much higher degree. The pen has been in their hands. I will not allow books to prove anything. And I think that's so interesting that actually, yes, maybe Austen is choosing not to, delve into these private male affairs, diving into their secret lives that's outside of what we see, because she recognizes that she doesn't have that experience. And if it offends her the other way round, that men are telling a woman's story, then actually she's not going to take up the pen and do it in the opposite way either, because
I actually love that. I think, in terms of, we've heard enough about the inner workings of these guys. Actually, this is about this. I think that's actually really interesting, and a kind of, if that's her kind of broader, overarching sort of thesis almost as a writer. And she was revolutionary, really, to be writing these, the overwhelmingly male environment at the time, that's been redressed quite a lot now. There's most published fiction authors are female now, I think, but it's but at the time, real outlier. And obviously her work didn't kind of take off until a bit later either, did it? So an incredible kind of sort of endeavor to redress the balance of literary power. It's actually sort of amazing. But I think, again, that just speaks to her her self-awareness, but also her awareness of the kind of broader workings of literature. It's just she's just real genius.
Yes, I love everything you just said. That it would be good to know as well what you think about the influence that Darcy has over Bingley, because I feel like this is a strength of character potentially, of whether or not you, but maybe I throw it out as a personal question, would you be inclined to trust your own judgment, or would you be inclined to trust the judgment of your friends?
Yeah, it's funny. I wonder if I've consulted my friends on any big, big decisions of mine, actually. And when I was considering their friendship, and Bingley's a bit more kind of intuitive, and actually his intuition is correct. It turns out, and Jane is the person for him, and Darcy's analysis and his prejudice has gotten in the way. And actually, I think the best decisions I've made in my life have been the ones that I've made quite quickly, actually. To move abroad or to do different things, and however I've come about them, even if I've taken a while to do them, when I've made my mind up in a kind of reasonably swift manner, then those have been the best things. So I kind of think, well, I think Darcy is being a good friend, but I wonder if I'm not sure I've ever actually gone to a friend for that kind of advice before the fact, maybe afterwards. But I think I've kind of made my decisions in isolation mostly. So I was thinking about it, and I was like, I think perhaps the friendship is used to illustrate that actually your intuition should be trusted in a lot of regards. I'm not sure. I think Bingley is correct in his. I don't know if everyone's intuition's great, but I feel like when I've acted intuitively, it tends to be better. And like Bingley, I like to believe in people first, and I'd like to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, because that's how I'd like to be received, and I'd like to kind of have a positive opinion of everyone until proven otherwise. And I think people are nice, whereas the opposite. And I think this obviously stems from Darcy's sort of from his fortune and his societal position, but I think that's quite a sort of miserable way to be, actually. And it causes a lot of misery in the book. So
yes.
I'd like a friend like Darcy, but only to talk to after
after you've made your choice.
Yeah.
Oh dear, that's funny. Yeah, I think I am more inclined on Darcy's side, that I would be, I don't know, I would definitely, like you said, kind of trust my own intuition over that of a friend. Actually, to my detriment sometimes. Sometimes I actually just don't tell my friends stuff and they find out like after the fact, like ages after the fact, because I've even forgotten. They're just like, you didn't say any of this. And I'm just like, oh, sometimes I just kind of go through things in my own head. But yeah, it's interesting to hear your thoughts on it as well. And obviously, given the difference between female friendships and male friendships and everything. But
Yeah, I don't know.
yeah.
Do you crowdsource your do you crowdsource your romantic decisions beforehand, or what's your?
No, I'm very much like
Yeah.
I'll just go off my own intuition. Yeah. I'm kind of, I like to be quite present and in tune with like, my own soul's drive. But yeah, not to be like too spiritual, but yeah, I tend to stick with that. And then I just tell my friends after the fact, like, this is happening, this is happening to me, like this is a thing. And also, like, this is sometimes why I can relate more to Jane, is I like to be quite private about it as well. And I don't think that necessarily is always a bad thing. I think the difference between Jane and Bingley is Bingley is quite open about his feelings. Like, he really just showcased that publicly. And obviously it's kind of to Jane's detriment that she doesn't, but at the same time, I can kind of understand why she would be that way, because sometimes you don't want to be like so overt about your feelings publicly, especially when you're just like seeing somebody. So
Mm.
yeah, I don't know. I think
No, I
it's
agree with you. I think Jane, in a way, like, that reticence is actually a respect. Like, and I think to not just introduce everyone you meet immediately to all your friends, or subject them, like to, because if things don't figure out, or if they're just someone you meet twice or something, then it's actually respectful to not waste your friends' kind of time and emotional energy on people, I think. And actually, Jane, she almost, she really likes him, doesn't she? And she almost doesn't want to jeopardize it. And like she could do with being a bit braver, but actually it's like, again, it comes from a good place with Jane, where she's like, oh, I hope this figures out, and then I can be, a bit more effusive and outgoing, and she's just trying not to jeopardize it. So it's coming from a kind of a more fearful place with Jane. And also I think she's just naturally a quiet person, a private person. But I think actually sometimes to not, yeah, throw everything open to the group chat is actually a sort of, it's respectful, actually.
I can't think of anything worse, but I do have friends who prefer to do that. Like, they
Yeah.
prefer to seek counsel and I mean, maybe this is the wrong word, but maybe even validation, from another friend. I think it takes time to get really comfortable with self-concept and being like, actually, I know my own mind, what I want, and also being comfortable with the fact that if I'm wrong, I can live with that.
Well, those friends maybe know themselves really well. Maybe they're like, oh, I do need a little bit of, like you say, I actually
I don't see the red flags I need to
yeah,
ask.
maybe that is a self-awareness thing as well. So everybody's different, and that's why these things are so interesting. But yeah, I think that maybe those are just actually, again, it's like knowing who you are and being like, okay, and a bit like Darcy and Bingley, it's like, okay, well, I know I'm flighty and whatever, so I've got my kind of serious analytical friend over here who I'm going to refer everything to, and like, it's when those balances get out of whack that problems happen. But that there's nothing wrong with asking people for their advice.
No, I agree. That, guys, I mean, the true love story is Bingley and Darcy. Let's be clear. That's the true love story in Pride and Prejudice.
What,
true bromance.
It probably is, in a way, because we never sort of see Elizabeth and Darcy's love story beyond sort of, we've reached an agreement, and then it sort of stops, and you're like, oh, no. Whereas obviously, these guys, we're on a real roller coaster with them.
And they're established. And there's just one more point that I want to make, and that's really interesting, that there's a bit later on when Elizabeth asks Darcy, like, when you told Bingley, what was his response? And he says, like, Bingley was really miffed at me. Like, he forgave me, but he was, like, not happy. And I think that speaks to Bingley's character as well. But he isn't such a pushover, because he can be like, I'm really pissed off with you, Darcy. Like, you just wasted, like, a good, like, 6 months. You know what I mean? This could have worked out for me way before. But also, like, Bingley, because the kind of person that he is, and I hope a lot of people are, you just forgive your friend, because there's so much more to a friendship than just like one instance where they may have been wrong about someone you're interested in romantically.
But I think as well, because Darcy's fault is it comes from a good place, doesn't it? It's like born of good reasons and faulty information and things. So so Bingley's you've wasted, but actually it's like, because the fault is not a malicious one, then he's okay. Like, and I think that's actually again like the sign of a really healthy friendships. So they are probably in their way the best functioning relationship in the novel.
I actually think it's super healthy modelling for male friendships. I think the pinnacle is Pride and Prejudice. I think that's
it's quite funny. Yeah, we should do sort of set text for all the sort of like men's mental health support groups. It's like, guys, go and read Pride and Prejudice and then just hit the clubs with your bros and then have a chat.
Know that it's safe and absolutely incredible to have these close intimate friendships. Like, that is good modeling. I love it. I'm here for it. And I've honestly loved this conversation. This has been such a great episode, so thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else that you want to add? Any extra thoughts? Now's the time.
No, I think like that's about it. I think I'm dry, but I've had a really good time. It's really fun, and thank you for sending over the quotes and things. It's made like talking about it so much easier and so much more interesting. So it's been really good fun. Thanks for having me.
Telling all my listeners that I'm like really intense and send out quotes. I've got all these quotes. What do you think of them?
She's really intense, guys. Yeah.
That's it. Any more guests now? That'll be the end of it.
Edit it.
Put you out just there. I had a fabulous time. Yep, that's enough. Thank you. Thanks, Ben.
Cheers, bye.
But I'd love to, let people find you. I think probably a lot of my listeners already follow you, but do you want to let people know where they can find you? Instagram, TikTok, that kind of thing?
Yeah, those are the places. So like TikTok and Instagram, BCE Mercer, like Ben Mercer. And I write a newsletter every week that's kind of like broadly like what I'm doing, but also just my thoughts on various things I come up with and book recommendations and that sort of thing. So you can find them on my social profiles and stuff. But I'd love to have you if you want to follow along. And that
is everything from us today, and I will see you in another episode.